Hi, Tony. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, really great to be on the job.
Could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Well, most importantly, I have responsibility for citizenship and multicultural Australia.
Yep.
And I've always had the view that when we talk about multicultural Australia, we're not talking about some minority group. We're talking about the definition of modern Australia.
Yep.
And one of our best characteristics is that diversity. I also have responsibility for areas like the environment and water and the arts as well. But the citizenship and multicultural issues go right to the heart of who we are as a nation and have really characterised my work the entire time I've been a Member of Parliament.
Great. So besides being a Shadow Minister for Multicultural Affairs, we understand that you also have been MP for Watson for many years,
Right.
which covers suburbs like Burwood, Ashfield, which all have a very high Chinese population density. How do you perceive the Chinese community in Australia?
That's right. Well, I used to cover Hurstville as well.
Oh, okay.
So the communities that I've been working with back since 2004 and where I've always lived have always had a very large number of people who have Chinese background. Chinese community has been part of the Australian community for more than 200 years. And we are better for that. There is occasionally a conversation that happens in Australian politics that views the Chinese community as though it's somehow new, or a community that hasn't always shared our national identity. It's a conversation that I've always found very strange, and a conversation that I think is deeply dishonest. The involvement and engagement of people of Chinese background has been part of the Australian story for more than 200 years, and we're better for it.
Okay. We understand that the Labor government is introducing and promoting second language learning projects in public schools in New South Wales. What do you think about this project as the Shadow Minister for Multicultural Affairs?
I'm really... Oh, sorry.
What are some of the other important strategies that the Labor Party have introduced or will introduce in the future that could encourage multiculturalism in Australia?
We want people to have good language skills. Every time that I've been to Beijing or Shanghai or Hong Kong, I've always been deeply impressed by the number of people who speak more than one language. Now, I have always appreciated the fact that while you'll often have a translator help you through when you're having big international meetings, the truth is translation is never precise. There are always words and ideas that only really exist in Mandarin or Cantonese or Shanghainese or whatever language people have. And I'm really proud that Tanya Plibersek, as our Shadow Education spokesperson, has been saying if we have a Labor government, then teaching these languages, in particular languages such as Mandarin, will be an important part of the education system in Australia.
So besides language, what other aspects of multiculturalism do you think it's important? Is there any other programs or projects related to those?
I think so often people oversimplify it. The number of times I've been to a community function and a politician has stood up and said, oh, we really appreciate your food, and then laughed about the fact that you can get honeyed prawns here, which I've never been able to find in China anyway. Culture goes so much deeper. I want people to get that full sense of Chinese art, of Chinese music, of Chinese cinema.
So speaking of multiculturalism, we understand that the Senate and the House have just passed the Refugee Medical Transfer Bill that was introduced by the Labor Party. However, it's been heavily criticized by the Morrison government. Did the Labor Party see it coming? And also, Bill Shorten has indicated that this transfer bill has been misinterpreted by the Liberal Party. What's your take on that?
I hate using the word lie. I think the word lie it's a very strong language, and you need to be very careful when you use language like that.
Right.
But the truth is Scott Morrison, as Prime Minister, has lied about what was carried in the Parliament and has lied about Labor's perspective. here are the facts. If people get on a boat, both sides of politics say that boat will be turned around. The policy is exactly the same. The only thing that we dealt with in Parliament was if someone who is in Nauru or Manus Island under our care needs medical help, then they'll be brought here in detention, they'll get the medical help, and then they'll have to leave again. And it's simply to make sure that they get the medical treatment that is required. Nothing more, nothing less. For people to then describe that, as the Prime Minister has, as being something that will change our visa rules, our border protection rules, it's simply not true. Those border protection rules are the same, and Labor made the decision a long time ago that the turn-back policy would be identical.
Okay, so I understand that many consider Labour government, in comparison to Liberal, have a relatively soft-line stance on the topics of refugees. What is the policy focus and the core values of the Labour Party towards the topics and issues of refugees in that regard?
If I can deal with the two areas, both with refugees, but also our attitude to the rest of the immigration program, because there are differences on each. With respect to refugees, the key difference we've been having with the government over the last couple of months is if someone needs medical help, should they be guaranteed that they'll get the medical help or not? And I think there are not many people who say if someone's sick and they need medical treatment, it should be denied to them. And that's been the main debate that we've had. But in terms of the issues that determine whether or not people come here by boat, the key policy is one of turn-back, and both sides of politics have the exact same policy on that. So that hasn't changed at all? Has not changed, will not change. The area with respect to the Chinese community in particular, where we have very different views, is when should someone be able to become an Australian citizen? Now, the government brought in legislation, and every member of the Liberal Party voted for this. It was their legislation that said, if you want to be an Australian citizen, you should have to be able to pass a university level English test. Mm-hmm. Now, that put a much higher burden on a whole lot of people. Now, the test of whether or not you will be a good Australian is not whether you have university level English. There are plenty of people born here who don't have university level English. There are plenty of people who are members of Parliament who I would argue don't have university level English. To say that that should determine whether or not you can become an Australian citizen is something that Labor will never support. But the government put that and kept that policy and tried to push that through the Parliament, the Liberal Party did. But what they did was even worse than that. Under their policy, if you were Chinese background coming from Singapore, for example, you would have to pass, and been speaking English your whole life, you would have to pass a university level English test. If you came from Canada, you would not have to pass a university level English test. They actually picked out Canada, the United States, New Zealand, Ireland and the UK and said if you come from any of those countries, you don't have to pass an English. That's very interesting because people from Canada often speak French there as well. That's true, that's true. But there are plenty of people who live in Singapore who've been speaking English their whole lives. That's right. Hong Kong, speaking English their whole lives. Mm-hmm. Increasingly, a lot of people in Shanghai have been speaking English their whole lives as well. They were all going to have a university level English test. Mm-hmm. Now, there are lots of words for that sort of citizenship policy, but if I put it in these terms, Labor will never support that. The Liberal Party tried to make that law. Mm-hmm. We fought that, we stopped it. Mm-hmm. If they win the election, the Liberal Party will try again. So you mentioned that you found the language test for immigrants have been pretty unfair that was introduced by the Liberal Party. How is that related with the refugee issues? Because do you think that you will have a different criteria of, how can I say, enforcing refugees to become an Australian citizen under the ruling of Labor government? If somebody is a permanent resident here, so some people come under the refugee program and end up as permanent residents. then the test that they should have to pass is a test that has been in place for about 15 years now. And we have always supported that test. We're not seeking to change it. And you look at people, and people in the Chinese community will often point to their own parents for people who've been here for a long time. And many of those parents have made a massive contribution to Australia, a massive contribution, but would never have passed a university level English test. Some parents would, some wouldn't, but all of them have made a great contribution to Australia, and we are lucky that they are here. With respect to refugees, if I put it in these terms, on the issues that matter in terms of will people from Indonesia come by boat or not, the policies between Liberal and Labor are identical.
Okay.
The key issue where there is a difference is with respect to whether or not, if someone needs medical help, whether or not they get it. The government then tries to build, the Liberal Party have tried to build a bit of a fear campaign, saying somehow this interacts with the rest of the immigration program. The rest of the immigration program, one of the key issues where we do have a difference is on that university level English test, and that's why I've referred to it.
Understood. So we understand that Australia has been a multicultural country for decades. However, recently there has been a hot topic news article and news reporting on one of the highway patrol officers making racist comments about Chinese towards the drivers on the highway. So what do you think about that issue? Is there any more progress on that particular news topic?
Can I say two things? First of all, the police in my local area, I've always seen them engage very well with all the different communities, including the Chinese community. And I was shocked when I saw those reports. If anyone has been racist, it should be called out and it should be condemned. I've personally written to the New South Wales Police asking them to respond to me about those allegations. I'll see what comes from that. But certainly, racist abuse is always wrong. And I think in previous interviews with Sydney Today, I've referred to the Walk for Respect, where when the Liberals have tried to change the law to allow more racist hate speech, I've always said no. And Labor has said no, and we've taken to the streets to make sure that those laws were not changed. Most members of Parliament will go through their whole lives without ever being the targets of racist abuse. But my friends won't, my neighbours won't, my community will all feel racist abuse from time to time. It doesn't matter who's responsible, a teacher, a police officer, someone in the street, or a member of Parliament. Whenever it happens, it needs to be called out, it needs to be opposed, and there needs to be an absolute strength from everybody in a representative capacity that we will make no exceptions for racism.
Then what do you think about Barry O'Sullivan? What do you think about his racist comment that he made in Parliament?
It doesn't matter who someone is, including if it's a Liberal Party senator, but it doesn't matter who it is. We have to condemn racist comments, and everybody needs to condemn them. I was shocked that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, just said, oh, it's not what he would have said. That's not good enough. If this was a member of the Labor Party, we would expel them. He should expel Barry O'Sullivan from the Liberal Party. He should say that these views are not acceptable within his party. And anything less than that, he's just become an apologist for comments against the Chinese community. I've had that many people in the streets of Campsie stop me in the street to say how horrified they were to hear those comments. And it's not like it was accidental. This guy has form. These comments should be condemned. He should not remain a member of the Liberal Party. He should be kicked out altogether.
Thank you very much. You're one of the first Australian politicians that have engaged WeChat as one of the social networking platforms to get connected with the Chinese population in Australia. However, these days, there have been controversies saying that WeChat could influence, or in fact could hurt, the final result of the federal election. What do you think about that?
I think we all need to make sure that the information we receive is accurate. At the last election campaign, there was information that went round on WeChat that I would argue was completely inaccurate. But I think the best way to respond to that isn't to say, well, therefore we'll avoid the platform. I think you have to engage in the platform. If people think that information's out there that's not true, then you get involved, you become part of the conversation and you engage. So, you know, I've always got my QR code out and on my business cards asking people to subscribe to the WeChat information.
You're a pro at it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's difficult because sometimes you'll put a message out and people respond to you in Chinese script and you think, okay, I'll have to go to somebody to find out exactly what's being said.
Okay.
But I make sure I participate in the conversation as much as I can. My view is simple. It's not for members of parliament to say, you have to come to us. We need to come to you. And if a whole lot of people are communicating with each other on WeChat, then I want to be in that conversation.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. So moving on to the broader questions, there have been some tensions between Australia and China in the last few years. What do you think is the main cause of these tensions? And in this love triangle of America, China, and Australia, how do you think Australia should position itself in order to secure and maximize the interests of the nation?
I think Australia has always been really well positioned to be able to play a constructive role.
Right.
It's in everyone's interests that the relationship is calm, that the relationship is constructive. And we need to remember the relationship between Australia and China is something that was forged under Labor when Gough Whitlam resumed official relationships with the Chinese government, and it's something that is always, Bob Hawke then strengthened it, Kevin Rudd obviously had a close relationship, and under Julia Gillard as well, where we had
of course
the Asian Century White Paper. So for the Labor Party, this is not only important to us because we have a deep relationship with the Chinese community, it's also important to us because of the legacy that we've always been engaged with in government. Because of that, it means we can be a trusted voice and a voice that is able to communicate respectfully, to communicate calmly, and make sure that the relationship that is there between people is one that makes its way through with governments as well. I'm an optimist on this. Some people get very wary about where the relationship heads at different points in time. I'm optimistic that when the relationship between the Australian people and the Chinese people is so strong, then the relationship with governments will work through as well.
Understand. To wrap this interview up, if you are to use one sentence to summarize the core values and policy focus of the Labor government in order for more Chinese to get connected, to get to know the Labor Party better, what would that be?
We have always seen our security as being security in Asia. Mm-hmm. The Liberal Party have always seen it as security from Asia. And I guess the simplest way I can say it is this: we don't view diversity as a minority group. Diversity is our strength. It's who we are. I don't see the Chinese community as being separate in any way from the rest of the community. We're all here together, and we're better because of that.
Great. Thank you very much, Tony. Nice to have you here. Thank you.